Hello, this is Jay Mitchell, and we are back for another episode of the Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have the Trump recipe, A New McCarthyism for Americans, Chaos for the World, from WorldCrunch.com by Ragnar OKXG. And yeah, I personally do think a lot of Trump and the Republicans are kind of McCarthyist these days. They call a lot of people, anyone who's critical of him, communist and all that. But I would argue that a lot of the progressives on Reddit are even more McCarthyist. You know, if you dissent from their official narrative, it's like, oh, you know, you're a Russian asset, fascist, Nazi. They'll throw every name in the book at you. And so increasingly, you know, with social media echo chambers, American politics is just increasingly McCarthy. And I would say, you know, if you dare question at all, the hive mind will come after you, and that includes both right-wing hive minds and left-wing hive minds. You know, on the parts of Reddit I'm usually at and I already do this podcast at, the left-wing hive mind is usually worse, but there are areas as well where the right-wing hive mind can be worse. So yeah, I definitely would agree we're increasingly seeing a new McCarthyism, but you know, it's not just orange man bad like this subreddit would have you believe. It's after anyone who it's increasingly on anyone who dissents from whatever the official narrative is at all of whoever they're talking to. Then we have Trump moves to stop congestion pricing tolls in New York City. Libertarian use taxes. What's that? From CH Relax, and that's cross post from the Fuck Cars subreddit. And yeah, I personally I don't really care for any kind the government forcing any kind of taxes or tolls. So I guess I would agree with Trump stopping the tolls. Both that being said, you know, it ultimately should go down to the local government rather than the federal government. But yeah, you know, ultimately, I do think it is libertarian to stop any tolls or taxations because I think people have a right to free travel, and a toll is definitely goes against right to free travel, regardless of who's doing it, even if they're a private business, I would say. And that's my thoughts on that issue. And we have What the Fuck from Ragnar OKXG, and that's crosswords from the Leopards Ate My Face subreddit. Well, it's only been 1 month, and that looks like a tweet from the White House. Congestion pricing is dead. Manhattan, all of New York is saved. Long live the king. President Donald J. Trump. And they did a picture of Trump wearing a crown. Trump, long live the king. And yeah, you know, that's just Donald Trump kind of being a Twitter troll. But, you know, if you want to be outraged about that, you should be allowed to be outraged about that. But, you know, at some point, you just gotta stop paying attention to him. You know, he's been doing this for like a decade now. At some point, you just gotta stop giving him the attention he craves. Nothing would hurt him more than people not paying attention to him. But sadly, it doesn't seem like anyone's learned that lesson at all over the past decade. And yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. So next we have Pentagon chiefs eyes funding cuts to some parts of the military by 8% from Reuters.com. And yeah, that's from CDN history student. And yeah, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has asked some parts of the military to propose what could be cut as part of a potential 8% spending reduction for them over each of the next 5 years. U.S. officials said on Wednesday, although it was unclear if the total defense budget would shrink. In memo described by Reuters to Reuters radio officials, Hegseth called for the proposal by February 24th. And yeah, I personally think this is one of the good things Trump is doing, but you know, Reddit seemingly has no values at this point, other than being anti-Trump, so Reddit will probably find a way to spin it as being a bad thing. They'll say, oh, you know, this is what Putin wants. Putin wants a weak U.S. military. But yeah, I personally think this is a good thing. I personally think, you know, a lot of U.S. money and taxpayer dollars too much goes to the Department of Defense. I think, you know, in my ideal system, we'd have all voluntary taxation, and people would be able to pay the Department of Defense whatever they want to. But as in the current system, I do think, you know, we do need to cut back military funding. I'm glad that, and that's, you know, not normally one that they cut back on. I'm glad that Trump does seem to be doing that currently. And yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. We have Trump enforces sweeping Medicaid cuts to give tax cuts to rich. Remember when Donald Trump promised not to touch Medicaid? He's already flipped, from NewRepublic.com. And yeah, I personally don't really care for Medicaid, full disclosure, I'm on Medicaid. It's objectively pretty shitty. There's only one doctor in my area that takes it, and after bouncing around dentists for a couple of years, I now pay for my current one out of pocket since none in my area take it anymore. So yeah, ultimately, I personally don't think the government should be involved in healthcare at all. I think if people want to pay for a government health insurance program through voluntary taxation rather than forced taxation, I think that would be okay. But regardless, I don't think Medicaid, if they want to cut it, I think they should be able to. Um, but yeah, I don't think it's going to happen. They always, the Republicans like Trump talk a lot about cutting programs like Medicaid, but they never seem to go through with it. And yeah, Trump does say a lot of stuff that he doesn't plan on going through with, but I'll have to see what happens. Then we have mandatory monthly uterus inspections incoming from CH Relax, and that's cross-post from the White People Twitter subreddit. That's a tweet from Jess Piper. She's some shit lib from Missouri, and it's a Blue Sky post, but it's pretty much a tweet. A Missouri representative filed a bill to track pregnancies in the state. HB 807 will maintain a central registry of each expectant mother who is at risk for seeking abortion of her unborn child and make the same available to a prospective adoptive parent who has completed screenings. And yeah, I personally would say I'm against that. I'm against government databases of any kind. I would say the government shouldn't be able to track any group for any reason whatsoever, and it's not something I personally care for. Then we have Doge has God mode access to government data from The Atlantic, and that's an archive link to The Atlantic from Baton 13. And yeah, I personally don't really care that Doge has access to government data, but pretty much everyone has access to government data at this point, so I don't think it really matters too much. Then we have ICE prosecutor in Dallas runs white supremacist X account from TexasObserver.org by Swamp Yankee Dan. And yeah, I personally don't really care for that. But pretty much any dissent at all is labeled by the left as white supremacists these days. And people do like to troll and shitpost. And if people do want to do that, that's on them. I personally don't really care for it. I do engage in it sometimes, but justify doing whatever you want to. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. People are tired of cancel culture. If he wants to run a white supremacist sex account, and he wants to keep that to himself, I think he should be able to do so. Then we all know about the government propaganda from Ragnarok KXG, and that's a YouTube video. This keeps getting taken down. I wonder why, from Whitney Cummings on YouTube. And yeah, I don't really watch all that, but yeah, government propaganda is definitely a big problem at this point, and social media has increasingly become government propaganda, I would argue. X is mostly government propaganda from a more right-wing perspective, and then you have Reddit, which is mostly government propaganda from a more left-wing perspective. And yeah, you eventually get tired of it, but it's only probably going to get worse as time goes on, and yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Elon saying the quiet part out loud from Ragnarok KXG, and that's a fake tweet from Elon Musk. It's not a real tweet, but he shared it anyway. Here's the hard truth: this country's billionaires are tired of subsidizing everyone else's schools, parks, healthcare, and even food and entertainment. You want nature? Buy some land, healthcare, befriend a doctor, entertainment, roll around the mud with your fellow pigs. And yeah, that's not a real tweet, but ultimately, I believe that's free speech. If you want to make a fake tweet of someone, you should have the free speech ability to do so. I personally think, this is just kind of coming out of the Tesla man bad, orange man bad time we currently live in. That's pretty much all Reddit can do at this point. It's either like 90% of the posts are either Tesla man bad or orange man bad. But yeah, if you want to just circle jerk by making up fake tweets, that's on you. You should be able to do that. Then we have Dial-Up McConnell Steps Down, Good Riddance from DailyBoulder.com from Ragnarok KXG, and that's cross-post from the Anything Goes News subreddit. And yeah, I personally don't really care for Mitch McConnell. He was kind of the old pre-MAGA wing of the Libertarian Party. I don't really care for MAGA either, but it's pretty much, I definitely say it's a step in the right direction from the old McConnell-era Republicans. And yeah, if he wants to step down, I don't think he's in good health, and he might get primaried anyway. So, he's been there for like 40 years, so it's about time, I would say. He's definitely a case for why they should have term limits for Congress, Nancy Pelosi as well. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have former Vikings punter Chris Cluey calling President Donald Trump's MAGA slogan the Nazi movement, engages in civil disobedience, and is arrested and carried out by a city council meeting by police from Ninja Lover, and that's a cross post from the Global News subreddit. And yeah, I don't really care for Chris Cluey. He's pretty much read it as a football player. I remember reading a story back when he was playing for the Vikings back during, I would say, like 2011 or 2012. He couldn't even name all the NFL teams. But yeah, I definitely do think, even if I don't really care for him, you shouldn't be forced out of a city council meeting, regardless of how insufferable you're acting, as long as you're not hurting anyone else physically. And that's what happened to Chris Cluey. So I definitely would agree this is the government being overly authoritarian, even if he was being relatively insufferable at the time of his speech. And yeah, that's my thoughts there. Then we have to have satire watch until the end from Ragnar OKXG, and that's a crosspost from there was an attempt subreddit to lower the price of eggs by going for an authoritarian president. And yeah, it's some guy on TikTok or somewhere. Just it's 14 minutes. I'm not gonna watch all this, but yeah, ultimately, people. I think people vote for on vibes more than anything else, and people definitely did get the vibe that Trump had a better grip on the economy than Kamala. So ultimately, if people do want to vote for her, vote for him for that reason, I think they should be able to. I personally don't care if either of them won. They'll both screw you over, maybe in slightly different ways, but the government's gonna screw you over regardless. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Jesse Waters. We are waging a 21st century information warfare campaign against the left from Donald Key, and that's a crosspost from the Joe Rogan subreddit. That looks like a tweet from S.N. Waters. We waging 21st century information warfare campaign against the left. What you're seeing on the right is it's asymmetrical. Someone says someone on social media, Musk retweets it, Rogan podcasts it, Fox broadcasts it, and by the time it reaches everybody, millions of people have seen it. And yeah, I do think increasingly society's become information warfare, but not in the way that Waters is describing, but rather, people are so up in their own echo chambers that they're increasingly just these weaponized echo chambers. People just want to be circle jerked and told that they're always right and how smart they are and how good they are. It's like a dog. You're saying, "Oh, you're a good boy. You're a good boy." That's pretty much it's all social media at this point. It's just a circle jerk, and at some point you get tired of it. That's why I personally usually try and seek out opinions that I disagree with on social media rather than opinions I agree with. Then we're about to learn just how eager the Supreme Court is to help Trump from RemovePaywall.com by Baton 13. And they said Hampton Dillinger, a federal official who President Donald Trump attempted to fire earlier this month, seems very likely to lose a lawsuit changing that firing eventually. But the Trump administration is impatient to make that happen as soon as possible, asking the Supreme Court to intervene in the lower court battle currently underway over the firing. And making this request, the administration is effectively asking the justice to resolve 4 questions about constitutional separation of powers just weeks after Dillinger filed the lawsuit. And yeah, I personally don't really care for the Supreme Court and all the courts in general, just like Trump doesn't, probably for different reasons. I don't really care for any branch of government, but ultimately, if the Supreme Court wants to hold Trump accountable, I think they should be able to do so. But with that being said, they already did give him presidential immunity to do pretty much whatever he wants, so I don't think it really matters what they have to say. And yeah, that's my thoughts there. Then we have Blackmail, from Baton 13. That's a crossroads from the It Could Happen Here subreddit. And it's a tweet from Batya Unger Sargon. Truly disturbing report in the Wall Street Journal. Lawyers at Twitter are threatening advertisers to spend more money on X, or else X ownership of Elon Musk will leverage his close relationship with Trump to torpedo mergers. This goes beyond a conflict of interest. It's straight up extortion. And I would agree with that, but the government's always kind of been corrupt when it comes to being involved in private business. But look at the military-industrial complex now. Private business is pretty much to determine the U.S.'s foreign policy. But regardless, just because Elon's more on my side than they are doesn't mean it's justified when he does it either. So yeah, I definitely do think we need to support the free market and not corporate cronyism. As it's like in the early 2010s, you had the Tea Party, which was said big government is the source of our problems, and then the Occupy Wall Street, which said big business is the source of all our problems. Well, in reality, they're pretty much joined at the hip, and this is a good example of that. Then we have the post-neoliberal delusion and the tragedy of Bidenomics from foreignaffairs.com by Color Monochrome. And yeah, I definitely, I personally think Trump's more of a, I wouldn't say we're in the post-neoliberal or just, I think Trump's more of a secret neoliberal than an open neoliberal compared to the rest of them. But regardless, I definitely do think, people need to move on from neoliberalism and having government do everything. But sadly, I don't know if that's coming anytime soon. It's like Ronald Reagan might as well just be the eternal president at this point. Then we have Republicans support small government from help feeding, and that's a cross post from the Micromobility NYC subreddit. It's time for NYC to fight back. And yeah, it's some meme, no king at any time. It says no parking at any time. It's no king at any time, and that's a Cybertruck with a crown on it. And then there's another thing, rally for congesting pricing. And yeah, I personally don't really, as we talked about that earlier, but if they want to rally, if they want to protest for whatever reason they want to, the Constitution does allow freedom of assembly even for groups you disagree with, so I think they should be able to. But that being said, Reddit's having like a protest every single day of the week, it seems, since Trump's been inaugurated, and eventually, they'll burn themselves out, I think. It's pretty much like 2017 all over again. They're just riling themselves up. Eventually, they'll get burned out and move on to the election of 2028, but we'll see how long that takes them. And we have immediately sees Trump administration get stern warning from judge from rawstory.com by Dr. 007. And yeah, ultimately, I personally don't think a stern warning is going to stop Trump, but Trump's probably not going to stop regardless, but so it doesn't really matter, I think, if this is Raw Story is pretty much just DNC propaganda like the rest of Reddit at this point, so yeah, that's pretty much all the subreddit is at this point, I would say. Then we have FBI Director Kash Patel calls for offensive operations to jail Americans they consider the enemy. Yes, we're going to be coming after people in the media. We're putting you on notice from Swamp Yankee Dan. And that's a cross post from the MAGA Nazi subreddit. And yeah, it's from Real America's Voice, the Steve Bannon show. And yeah, I personally think Kash Patel is probably one of the better Trump appointees, but the libertarian solution isn't just to have a good FBI director, it's to get rid of the FBI entirely. People are saying, the government's weaponized against whoever the party not in power is. Well, I would say the government's weaponized against the people regardless of who's in power. And hopefully Kash Patel reigns in some of the FBI's authoritarianism, but, I'm probably just going to get stabbed in the back again on that. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Trump Justice Department to delete federal police misconduct database. And that's number from Swamp Yankee Dan. That's a archive linked to the Washington Post. And yeah, as I said earlier, I personally don't think we should have government databases of anyone, regardless of the reason. So I personally think this is a good thing. But, I guess you do have an argument that we need to keep track of police authoritarianism as well. But I personally think that should be the job of the people rather than that of the state. Then we have Doge said it cut $250 million from Social Security budget, but it was only about $500,000 from the Intercept.com by Tom 13. And yeah, that's how, the Republicans didn't really act like overcutting all these programs and benefits. But, they're really not cutting that much. In fact, with all the other stuff they're adding, like the new White House Faith Office or Doge itself, increasingly they probably add money, spend more than they actually cut. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have U.S. Attorney launches probe into whether Schumer Garcia made threats to Justice Musk from thehill.com by Swamp Yankee Dan. And, yeah, I personally don't think you should be issuing threats, but, I do think threats are free speech. And I do think, Congress leaders like Schumer should be more accountable than just making threats. They shouldn't be like these average Redditors. But, if they want to do that, I think that does fall under free speech. But, you shouldn't just be like an average Redditor saying, we need to Luigi everyone. And, yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. And then, finally, we have Trump deletes nationwide database and leaks misconduct from NSN.com by Tom 13. We talked about that one earlier, so I'm just going to skip over that, and we're going to wrap up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.